What if I told you that some of the most terrifying ghost and demon movies ever made were completely destroyed by their own sequels? We're talking about horror masterpieces that spawned follow-ups so catastrophically bad they won Razzie Awards, earned single-digit Rotten Tomatoes scores, and made fans pretend they never existed. Here's the shocking truth. Hollywood has a perfect track record of ruining supernatural horror franchises. Every single ghost or demon movie that became a cultural phenomenon eventually got a sequel so terrible it damaged the original's legacy forever. These aren't just bad movies. They're franchise killers that prove sometimes the most terrifying thing about horror isn't the ghosts on screen. It's what studios do to beloved characters. So in this video, we're exposing 6 supernatural horror franchises that were murdered by their own sequels. From Oscar-nominated classics turned into Razzie winners to cultural phenomena that became box office disasters, we're revealing the exact moment each franchise died and why these sequels are considered some of the worst horror movies ever made. By the end of this video, you'll understand why sometimes the real horror story happens behind the camera. Franchise 1, The Exorcist. From masterpiece to Razzie winner, The Exorcist, 1973, is widely considered the most fantastic supernatural horror film ever made. It earned 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, grossed over $400 million worldwide, and created a cultural phenomenon that had audiences fainting in theaters and priests blessing screenings. Then came Exorcist 2, The Heretic, in 1977, and it's not hyperbole to say it's one of the worst sequels ever made. The numbers tell the story. While the original has 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, the sequel has a devastating 15% from critics and 17% from audiences. But the real proof of its failure? It won 4 Razzie Awards, including Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay. What went wrong? The sequel abandoned everything that made the original terrifying. Instead of intimate psychological horror, it became a globe-trotting adventure with ridiculous special effects and a plot that made no sense. The film suggested that Pazuzu, the demon from the first movie, was actually trying to help humanity evolve, destroying the original's religious horror. The box office disaster was immediate. Despite the original's massive success, Exorcist 2 earned only $30 million worldwide and killed the franchise for decades. Critics called it a disaster of such magnitude that it's almost worth seeing as a lesson in how not to make a movie. The sequel was so bad that it retroactively damaged the original's reputation and proved that even Oscar-nominated horror masterpieces aren't safe from Hollywood's sequel machine. Franchise 2, Poltergeist. From Spielberg magic to direct-to-video hell. Poltergeist, 1982, was a perfect storm of supernatural terror and Spielberg magic. The film earned 3 Oscar nominations, grossed $121 million worldwide, and created iconic moments like They're Here and the TV static scene that defined 1980s horror. The franchise's decline was gradual, but devastating. Poltergeist 2, 1986, was mediocre with 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, but Poltergeist III, 1988, was a complete disaster with only 11% from critics and 27% from audiences. The third film was so bad it killed the franchise for 27 years. What destroyed this franchise? Each sequel moved further away from the original's suburban nightmare concept. The third film relocated the family to a Chicago skyscraper, completely abandoning the haunted house premise that made the original work. The special effects became laughably bad, and the plot made no logical sense. The box office numbers proved the franchise's death. The original made $121 million, the second made $40 million, and the third made only $14 million worldwide. Each sequel earned less than half of its predecessor, showing audiences were abandoning the franchise. The 2015 remake attempted to revive the property, but earned only 31% on Rotten Tomatoes and $95 million worldwide, proving that some franchises can't be resurrected once terrible sequels have killed them. Franchise 3, The Amityville Horror, from True Story. Terror to endless cash grabs. The Amityville Horror, 1979, was lightning in a bottle. A supernatural horror film based on a true story that tapped into real fears about haunted houses and demonic possession. The film earned $86 million worldwide and created a cultural phenomenon that spawned books, documentaries, and endless debate about its authenticity. Then, Hollywood discovered they could slap Amityville on any haunted house movie and make money. The result was a parade of increasingly terrible sequels that destroyed the franchise's credibility. Amityville 3D, 1983, has 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, while Amityville: The Evil Escapes, 1989, was so bad it went straight to television. The franchise became a joke with sequels like Amityville Dollhouse, Amityville: A New Generation, and The Amityville Curse, most earning 0 to 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. These weren't just bad movies, they were cynical cash grabs that had nothing to do with the original house or story.
The numbers show the franchise's complete collapse. While the original made $86 million, most sequels went direct to video or earned less than $5 million. The 2005 remake with Ryan Reynolds made $108 million, but earned only 23% on Rotten Tomatoes, proving audiences had lost faith in the brand. The Amityville franchise became synonymous with cheap, exploitative horror that prioritized quantity over quality, turning a respected supernatural thriller into a punchline. Franchise 4, Hellraiser, from Clive Barker's vision to studio hack jobs. Hellraiser, 1987, was Clive Barker's masterpiece of supernatural horror, introducing Pinhead and the Cenobites as sophisticated demons who explored the boundaries between pleasure and pain. The film earned cult classic status and spawned a successful sequel that expanded the mythology. Then the studio took control away from Barker, and the franchise died a slow, painful death. The later sequels became increasingly disconnected from Barker's vision, culminating in Hellraiser Revelations, 2011, which has 27% from critics and 18% from audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. The proof of the franchise's destruction is in the budget numbers. The original Hellraiser cost $1 million in 1987, while Hellraiser Revelations was made for only $300,000 in 2011. Less money in actual dollars despite 24 years of inflation. This shows how little the studio cared about quality. Clive Barker himself disowned the later sequels, publicly stating that they had nothing to do with his vision and were made solely to retain film rights. When the creator of a franchise publicly criticizes his movies, you know something has gone wrong. The franchise became a cautionary tale about what happens when studios prioritize legal ownership over creative integrity, turning sophisticated supernatural horror into cheap, direct-to-video garbage. Franchise 5, Insidious, from fresh scares to tired formula. Insidious, 2010, revitalized supernatural horror with fresh scares, innovative concepts like The Further, and genuinely creepy demons. The film made $97 million worldwide on a $1.5 million budget and earned 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, proving that original supernatural horror could still work. The franchise maintained its quality through the first 3 films, but Insidious, The Red Door, 2023, showed clear signs of decline, with 38% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. More importantly, it had the lowest opening weekend of the entire franchise, earning only $32 million compared to the original's $97 million total. What went wrong? The 5th film felt formulaic and uninspired, recycling scares from previous entries without adding anything new. Critics called it a tired retread and creatively bankrupt, suggesting the franchise had run out of fresh ideas. The box office decline tells the story. Each Insidious film has earned progressively less money, showing audience fatigue with the formula. The Red Door's poor reception suggests the franchise may have reached its natural endpoint. While not as catastrophically destroyed as other franchises on this list, Insidious shows how even successful supernatural horror series can decline when they prioritize formula over innovation. Franchise 6, The Ring, from cultural phenomenon to forgotten flop. The Ring, 2002, was a cultural phenomenon that made everyone afraid of VHS tapes and 7-day countdowns. The film earned 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, made $249 million worldwide, and created iconic imagery that defined 2000 horror. Then came Rings, 2017, 15 years later, and it was a complete disaster. The sequel earned only 11% from critics and 56% from audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. making it one of the worst-reviewed horror sequels ever made. The box office numbers tell the story of complete franchise collapse. While The Ring made $249 million worldwide, Rings made only $83 million, less than one-third of the original's gross, despite inflation and higher ticket prices. This represents one of the most dramatic franchise declines in horror history. What destroyed The Ring? The sequel tried to update the concept for the digital age, but completely misunderstood what made the original scary. Instead of the slow-building dread and mysterious mythology, Rings became a generic supernatural thriller with jump scares and a convoluted plot about digital transmission. Critics called Rings unnecessary, creatively bankrupt, and a cash grab that dishonors the original. The film was such a failure that it killed any plans for future sequels, ending the franchise permanently. The Ring's destruction proves that even the most successful supernatural horror films aren't immune to terrible sequels that can destroy decades of goodwill in a single movie. And there you have it, 6 supernatural horror franchises that were destroyed by their sequels. From The Exorcist Razzie-winning disaster to The Ring's box office collapse, these films prove that Hollywood has a perfect track record of ruining horror movies about ghosts and demons. What makes these failures so tragic is that each original film was genuinely great. These weren't mediocre movies that spawned bad sequels. They were masterpieces, cultural phenomena, and genre-defining classics that deserved better than the cash-grab disasters that followed. The pattern is always the same. Studios see success and immediately try to replicate it without understanding what made the original work. They prioritize quick profits over creative integrity, resulting in sequels that not only fail as movies, but actively damage their predecessors' legacies. These franchise disasters serve as warnings about the dangers of sequel culture in horror. Sometimes the most terrifying thing about a great horror movie isn't the ghosts or demons on screen. It's knowing that Hollywood will eventually make a sequel so bad, it ruins everything you loved about the original. Which of these franchise disasters hurt you the most as a horror fan? Have you ever pretended a terrible sequel doesn't exist to preserve your love for the original? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into horror's most significant failures and successes. Remember, sometimes the real horror story happens in the boardroom, not the haunted house.